Competition is something that's been a part of human history for thousands of years. And in reality, competition is everywhere around us in today's society. So what exactly is competition all about, and why do we as human beings constantly strive and seek out more competition? Well, on this week's episode of GetPsyched, we're going to be looking at exactly that. Hey guys, welcome to another week's episode of GetPsyched, and like I said, this week we're going to be looking at the psychology of competition and what motivates us toward competition. And the first thing to note when thinking about the psychology of competition is to know that competition is absolutely everywhere around us. It's in an economic stance when we look at financial markets. It plays a big role in selecting powerful politicians such as presidents and prime ministers. It's even evident in our educational system when students try to improve their grades and do extracurricular activities in order to get ahead and get into the top universities and college courses. And of course, it plays a massive role in people's passion for sport. The bottom line here is that competition is absolutely everywhere around us, and in fact is part of human nature. Now, this might sound like a really strange question for psychologists to ask, but it is an important one. Psychologists want to know more about the psychology of competition in order to understand our motivations for things such as worthy causes or donating to charities, that kind of thing. For example, there was a recent psychological study conducted in Princeton where psychologists were interested to understand how competition impacted people's motivation to reduce their energy consumption. Now, the competition consisted of the student block or the student residential block that reduced their level of energy consumption the most won a prize. And what the psychologists found was actually really interesting. I'm going to put a little graph up here in the screen for you to have a look at how the energy reduction came about at the start of the competition and then suddenly increased at the end of it again. Now, what these psychologists found was that when the competition started, the reduction in energy consumption from students really did dramatically decrease. But when the competition finished, it increased at a really rapid rate, and actually you'll see on the graph that some of the markers and some of the energy consumptions from some residential blocks were actually even higher than they were before the competition started. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons for psychology. Fundamentally, we learn more about the psychology of competition, but we also learn more about human nature and what competition actually does to us. When we look at this on a motivational standpoint, we can see that there are two pillars to human motivation when it comes to competition. The first is intrinsic and the second is extrinsic motivation. Now, this example utilized by psychologists at Princeton University when we're trying to reduce energy consumptions from students is an example of extrinsic motivation. Wow, motivation. Now, fundamentally what this means is that it's external to them. These students were motivated to partake in this competition because there was a chance that they actually might win a prize at the end of it. Extrinsic motivations mean that people work towards an end point, and fundamentally that's their goal. The end point is their goal. They don't actually adopt any of the behaviors that they've learned during the competition into their everyday life. And as you've seen in this graph from this research done at Princeton, you can see that that's exactly the case. Like I said, when the competition started, energy consumption rapidly decreased, and when the competition finished, it increased again. Now, intrinsic motivation is where our competitiveness actually develops into learned behavior. So perhaps we're competing in something, but we do it for reasons internally. We're much more likely to adopt those behaviors that we've learned in the competition into our everyday lives as we move forward. Fundamentally, intrinsic motivation means that we do something because we fully believe in it, because we're passionate about it. And this is backed by psychological research. When we do something that we feel powerful about, or when we feel passionate about, for example, we might be helping the homeless, or we might actually be reducing energy consumption if we're passionate about it, what actually happens to us is that we get releases of dopamine and endorphins, and it actually makes us feel really, really good. Fundamentally, when we have intrinsic motivation and we experience intrinsic competition, we adopt the behaviors that we experience during that competition. Now, for example, if students in this example in Princeton were really passionate about energy consumption and reducing their levels of energy consumption because of the competition, it's likely that they would maintain that level of reduction in energy consumption as the competition surpassed. Now, perhaps that was the case for a few students at Princeton, but overall, it was extrinsic motivation that encouraged these participants to take part in the competition and hopefully win a prize at the end. Now, you might be asking a little bit about why is intrinsic and extrinsic motivation got anything really to do with the psychology of competitiveness and competition? Well, the truth is that intrinsic and extrinsic motivations actually have a huge role in understanding our levels of competition and the psychology of competitiveness. And reasons being is that psychologists have actually found that if somebody has an intrinsic motivation, let's use energy consumption again, but are given extrinsic motivators to improve their energy consumption even further, such as winning a prize in a competition at the end, it can actually have negative implications on our intrinsic motivations. Psychologists have found that when we have an intrinsic motivation for something and it's replaced by an extrinsic motivation, there can actually be reductions and suppressions in how we're intrinsically motivated to do something that we deem as worthwhile. A pretty decent example of this is the ALS Ice Bucket challenge that you might have remembered from a few years ago. Fundamentally what happened is that people donated money toward ALS, a really worthy cause, when they dumped a bucket of ice water over each other's heads. And in turn, ALS and charities devoted to ALS really did experience a huge increase in donations. They experienced tens of millions of dollars worth of donations in a very short period of time. However, there wasn't a lasting effect on the donations and the charitable contributions experienced by ALS after the Ice Bucket Challenge ended. Now, it's probably true that there are some that continue to contribute to ALS because of the Ice Bucket Challenge, but it's highly likely that a very large percentage no longer do. This is a pretty good example of how intrinsic motivations and extrinsic motivations work collaboratively and actually combat with one another and impact the way that we are motivated to compete and take part in competition throughout our daily lives. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching this week's episode of GetPsyched. Like I said, we've been looking at the psychology of competition and competitiveness. We've also been looking at how this relates to intrinsic and extrinsic motivations. If you've been enjoying the videos, guys, then make sure to subscribe. You can hit the subscribe button and you can hit that little bell next to the subscribe button and you'll get weekly reminders of every time I upload every Monday. Thanks so much for watching again, guys, and hopefully catch you next week.